Hi everyone, the webinar will begin in just a moment. Hello everyone and welcome to the Epilepsy Research Institute Insights webinar. My name is Caoimhe Bennett and I'm Director of Research Operations at the Epilepsy Research Institute. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is taking a look at the Institute's 2024 Grant Awards. We're delighted to be joined today by Catherine, who's a member of our SHAPE network, alongside the Institute's Scientific Advisory Committee Chair, Professor Mike Cousin from the University of Edinburgh, and Annie Amjad, the Institute's Head of Research and Involvement. And between Mike and Annie, they've been overseeing this year's grant round, so we'll get their perspectives from them today. Thank you so much to everyone who has submitted questions in advance of today. And to begin our webinar, I'm delighted to hand over to Catherine, a member of our SHAPE network, who'll be speaking about her experience of epilepsy.
So hello everybody, my name is Catherine and I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to join this webinar. So I am the parent of an 11-year-old boy who was diagnosed with epilepsy when he was 3 years old. And this was because of some side effects from treatment for leukemia when he was about 2.5. So we've been living with epilepsy now for about 8 years. And his epilepsy is what they describe as focal seizures, and he has around about 10 to 15 seizures per month, and they come in clusters. So we might go about a week or so with no seizures, and then we'll have about 3 or 4 in a 24-hour period, and then we'll have a break for maybe another week. So unfortunately for us, there's no known trigger for these seizures, and so we don't know when they're going to happen. They can sort of happen anytime, anywhere, and they can last for a few seconds up to about 5-6 minutes. So it's a very stressful time for us as a family, I have to admit, because we just don't know if he's going to have a seizure that day or not. Our son is brilliant at being able to cope with them, but it is something that impacts on our everyday life. We've tried very different epileptic medications. We've been on single ones, and currently at the moment we're on sort of a dual medication to try and control them, but they're describing it now as drug-resistant epilepsy. Because it's focal epilepsy also, we've started down the surgical tract, whether or not that is an option for us and able to help manage his seizures. And currently we have tests for them happening next week. So hopefully that goes well and we can get some insight into what's going on with his seizures.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And gosh, so it's really interesting to hear about your family's experience of epilepsy, but I suppose we're speaking to you at a key moment when you and your family are considering the surgical pathway as well. That's a huge decision for you as a family to take, really.
Yeah, I mean, we've only had the first set of tests, so the week-long EEG. And so next week is the spectral scan EEG, which is a little bit more investigation. So we still actually don't know whether or not surgical solution will be an option for us. So it is a whole lot of unknowns and uncertainty, but it sort of feels good in some ways that we're exploring it to at least know, is this an option for us or is it not?
Definitely. And so, Catherine, you are a member of our SHAPE network. And I wonder kind of what motivated you to join the SHAPE network and get involved in research.
So I'm involved in a lot of patient and public involvement with other charities, and I've seen it have a very positive impact on the way research is planned and also conducted. And so I really wanted to do this also for epilepsy research because it is something that's very close to us. So, so I think it's important to, with all our lived experience, to do something positive. to actually sort of feel like you're making a difference rather than just living with it. And so if we can give that back to the community and make sure that the research they do is very impactful for us, or even for people like us, or for people who get diagnosed with epilepsy in the future, then it makes you feel really good. So I know we can make a difference by doing this, and so I really wanted to be involved.
Brilliant. Well, we'll be hearing a little bit more about your experience in the application clinic for this year's grant round in just a few minutes. But for now, and we'll be bringing you back for some Q&A at the end. But for now, thank you so much, Catherine. It's been so brilliant hearing your family's experiences. So thank you for joining us.
It's okay.
And now I'm going to introduce Mike and Annie, who are going to speak about some of this year's awarded the 2024 grant awards. So really excitingly, this was the Epilepsy Research Institute's inaugural grant round as the Institute, and a record £2 million of funding has been awarded, which has been our biggest annual investment to date. And this covers a vast 14 pioneering projects involving 58 researchers and collaborators, both based here in the UK and internationally. So it's been a huge year and a huge significant investment in epilepsy research. So I'll now hand over to Mike and Annie to introduce each of the projects, and we'll hear a little bit from each of the newly awarded grant holders.
Great. So the first project we have to announce this year is the Northwest Doctoral Training Centre across the universities of Manchester and Liverpool. It is going to be led by Dr. Rebecca Bromley and Professor Simon Keller, and the centre will consist of a series of complementary PhD projects, all with a focus on cognition in epilepsy.
So the Epilepsy Research Institute's Northwest Doctoral Training Centre is going to not only allow these individuals to do their research, but we're also going to make sure that we take them through quite an extensive set of training, of education, to ensure that they're equipped to contribute to the epilepsy community in the future.
And of course, most importantly, it brings the next generation of PhD students through who will focus on epilepsy research and may dedicate their careers to the most important research questions in epilepsy.
The first grouping of projects focuses on the offspring of people with epilepsy and how in some cases they may be at greater risk of having cognitive difficulties themselves, and we're investigating that following up large cohorts of children born to people with epilepsy. And secondly, we're doing some lab-based investigations to understand some of the mechanisms behind why that high risk is there.
The second group of projects is on early epilepsy, now cognition's impaired in early epilepsy. So we know that in patients who have had epilepsy for a long period of time, things like memory and thinking can be impaired, but we don't know what's happening in the early stages really when epilepsy is diagnosed, and how that changes over time and who's at risk. So the second group of projects will be looking at that in data that's already collected and data that the students will collect in combination with their brain imaging.
And our final group of projects is understanding decision making. You know, you might have a treatment that treats seizures, but actually places the person with epilepsy at higher risk of cognitive difficulties, and how those decisions are made and the psychological factors that come into play. So that means that clinicians can have those conversations in a much more appropriate and useful way with people with epilepsy in the future.
It brings together clinical and laboratory research across the live course in epilepsy research, rather than working in silo in paediatric or only adult cases.
And so overall, bringing these projects together, we really hope this new Northwest Doctoral Training Centre will be able to really enhance our understanding and our application to improve cognition for people with epilepsy and their offspring.
Okay, next, we worked in partnership with the Medical Research Council to fund a clinical research training fellowship. Now, Dr. Oliver Davis at the University of Cambridge will study the genes involved in DNA folding to investigate whether they underpin underlying electrical activity.
So I'm really interested in the question of whether epilepsy could begin when our brains first develop. And that's motivated by the observation that in some syndromes where epilepsy is really hard to treat and really common, they're caused by mutations in genes that are first expressed and used by embryos when the brain is first developing. To explore that, I'm going to take a model of brain development in a petri dish and look at healthy brains and compare that to ones with mutations in genes that cause some of those syndromes where epilepsy is really common and hard to treat. From that, I can take those organoids and compare how they develop. I'd then like to look at certain aspects of the cells in those brains, in particular at the nucleus, because these genes have really important roles potentially in controlling how DNA is stored. And I hypothesised that atypical DNA storage can affect brain development and lead to electrical instability. So this is really pioneering research that's seeking to uncover really new and interesting ways in which epilepsy might develop as a disease. And through that, we hope to be able to identify new treatment targets, which will be particularly useful in conditions where current treatment strategies aren't as effective as we'd like them to be. So I'm doing the Clinical Research Training Fellowship supported by the Medical Research Council and Epilepsy Research Institute. And that will really have profound impacts on my ability and to do research, which will hopefully be high impact and help to transform the lives of people with epilepsy. It's also transformative in terms of enabling me to bring in novel and leading technologies that can really bring new insights into the epilepsy field. Such as the cortical brain organoids that my supervisor is a world-leading expert in. They're kind of some of the most advanced models we have of early brain development, which my project really focuses in on. Thank you so much to the supporters of the Epilepsy Research Institute. It's only through their generosity that pioneering work like this is possible.
We're really excited this year to have funded 4 Epilepsy Research Institute Emerging Leader Fellowships. The first one to introduce to you is Dr. Gasharai Mbijvu at the University of Liverpool, who will carry out a data science project to investigate the safest ways for people to stop taking sodium valproate.
Sodium valproate is an anti-seizure medication and as a medication to reduce the number of seizures in people affected by epilepsy. It's one of the most effective medications we have, so more effective than any other in a type of epilepsy called generalized epilepsy, which affects around 1/3 of people affected by epilepsy. But on the other hand, it's highly harmful to the unborn child, and we know traditionally that this has been in women on sodium valproate, and more recently evidence suggests that it's also harmful to the unborn child on men taking sodium valproate. And so really the question is, how can we help make informed decisions about either remaining on sodium valproate or being withdrawn from it, and if withdrawing from it, how we can do that safely. At the heart of this study is my experience as a clinician when I came across sad cases where people may have had sodium valproate withdrawn for understandable reasons, but came to harm. So this project has 2 aspects. The first is where we mimic a clinical trial using health data, and we look for patterns in the health data on people who remain on sodium valproate and those who switch to another medication in terms of who is at lower risk of particular harms such as hospital admissions, injuries, or death, for example, which is a sad outcome that could happen in this scenario. And what we then do is create a tool that would inform the discussion between a clinician and a patient. So that tool would be based on your own personal characteristics, your age, the type of epilepsy you have, for example. You'd have that plugged into the tool, and the doctor could then say to you, well, okay, based on these characteristics, if I switch you to this medication, your risks of readmission to hospital, seizures, or mental health changes are this. And you could then make an informed decision to say, okay, those are acceptable to me, I'll switch to this medication. So that really would be the method by which we get from health data to supporting people making informed decisions.
Okay, our next Emerging Leader Fellow is Dr. Ilaria Bellumo from Imperial College London, who will develop a skin and breath test for the diagnosis of epilepsy and the prediction of seizures.
It's very important to develop an accurate diagnostic test for epilepsy because many people are misdiagnosed. So they have seizure, but they actually don't have epilepsy. So actually they are not responsive to therapy. And people that actually have epilepsy have a delayed diagnosis. We know that an ideal test needs to be possible to perform during or shortly after seizure. So that's why the non-invasive tool is very important in this case. So my project is called VIBES, that is the acronym of Volatile Non-Invasive Biomarker of Epileptic Seizure. The aim of VIBES is to develop a non-invasive test for the diagnosis of epilepsy and a non-invasive test for prediction of seizure. We want to do so analyzing the small molecules that are contained in our breath and emitted by our skin. The breath test is just basically we will ask the patients to blow in a bag that is like inflating a balloon. And then the breath from the bag will be passed to the tubes that we will use for the analysis. For the skin test, we will use a medical gauze, so we will swab the skin of the patients in the upper back and then analyze the gauze. We can know a lot about people's health analyzing these molecules, because these molecules are able to give us a precise picture of what is happening in the body in that moment. And our group at Imperial College is highly specialized in measuring this molecule, and thanks to a very sensitive mass spectrometry technique that is able also to analyze very small quantity of these compounds. For the prediction test, well, this will hugely improve the quality of life of people with seizure, because one day will be possible to develop a portable device that can be always together with them and alert them when a seizure is coming. This project will have like a very fast impact on people's lives, and people with epilepsy have been involved in this project since the beginning, the very early days in which this project was designed. While some of us try to understand the basic mechanism, we should try to improve their life as much as we can. And this is something that I hope that VIBES, my project, will be very helpful.
Our next emerging leader is Davide Gianpiccolo at University College London, who will be testing a new surgery technique focusing on network.
This project is a project within the way we perform epilepsy surgery. So the traditional way to perform epilepsy surgery over the last 100 years hasn't really changed. And as a result, actually, our rates of seizure freedom have not improved. Why is now very clear that the patients that are resistant to 2 or more drugs are not going to become seizure-free with medication and need surgery. Only half of the patients that have surgery become seizure-free. And I think this is unsatisfactory. I think there is so much more that we can do to increase this and also to decrease the rates of cognitive deficit, which I think in epilepsy surgery are still high. I think there is increasing evidence that actually this disorder is not a disorder of the cortex, but is a brain disorder that involves networks. And I think on this perspective, not only the cortex, but also deep nuclei, subcortical structures, and the cable that connects the cortex to the structure is very relevant to the architecture of epilepsy. And I believe that implementing a network perspective on the way we perform surgery, as has been done in, I think, in other type of surgery for different brain conditions, it really can increase both the rates of seizure freedom, but also the rates of cognitive outcome. And really the project moves around this. So in the study proposed, we have 2 parts. On one end, we are going to look into the patients that have already been operated for epilepsy, and to look which are the common cables that have been cut and that have made them seizure-free for a longer time. And then we are going to have a prospective part in which we are going to infuse this knowledge in our resection planning to make sure that we include the disconnection of these cables so in the future patients are going to be operated, to make sure that they can enjoy a longer period of seizure freedom.
Our final Emerging Leader Fellowship is Dr. Nicolas Maréchal-Negrin from King's College London, who will study whether it's possible to replace interneurons in a model of temporal lobe epilepsy.
In simple terms, we have 2 main types of neurons in the hippocampus. One are inhibitory, which are the interneurons, and the other one are excitatory. So when the interneurons, the inhibitory, are dead, there is the imbalance and they render the network more excitable. And this is partially the cause of the seizures. Unfortunately, many patients are not responding to pharmacological treatments. So I have been pursuing a new strategy, which is the conversion of some of scar-forming cells into the damaged hippocampus, into these interneurons, and in this way repair the brain from inside and restore the inhibition. In this grant, I'm going to test a new recipe to convert these scar-forming cells into a specific subtype of interneuron that can exert really powerful inhibition. So this grant will allow me to advance this cell-based therapy to stop seizures. And of course we are in the early steps, but after that, if we succeed, the next step is going to be the development of clinical trials, so the patient will have a direct impact after the grant. First, it will allow me to conduct research independently. Second, it will give me the chance to gain a lot of expertise in cells-based therapies to treat epilepsy and to learn a lot in the epilepsy field. And thirdly, I'm going to learn from people affected by epilepsy, from their personal experience that will not only shape this grant, but also my future research, and also it's going to be a great motivation for conduct the research.
We are also really pleased to have partnered with Dravet Syndrome UK this year to co-fund a further 2 Emerging Leader Fellowships. Our first Epilepsy Research Institute and Dravet Syndrome UK Fellow is Dr. Lisa Clayton at University College London. Lisa will be investigating dysautonomia in Dravet syndrome.
So Dravet syndrome is a rare neurological condition. I say rare, it's 1 in about 15,000 live births. Seizures is one of the comorbidities, but then there are many other comorbidities, eating difficulties, mobility issues, intellectual disability and behaviours are often seen, and it's a lifelong condition, it's not just in childhood. We're so excited to be partnering with the Epilepsy Research Institute today. We fund research and it's really important for us, it's something we've been doing for years, but to partner with an organisation this big has really helped us find a great fellow that we probably couldn't do on our own, and we found this piece of research so exciting and really think it's going to impact and help our families.
So in 30 adults with Dravet syndrome, I'm going to be carrying out autonomic function tests. These are non-invasive, simple tests that are done in various hospitals in the country. And we'll be looking at the autonomic control of heart rate and body temperature, trying to understand how this affects people with Dravet syndrome, whether we can predict who might develop it, whether there are risk factors for developing autonomic dysfunction, and then ultimately whether we can find ways to screen for, treat, prevent and manage autonomic problems in people with Dravet syndrome. The autonomic nervous system controls heart rate, and we know that abnormalities in the autonomic control of heart rate can be a risk factor for sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. This is the leading cause of premature mortality in people with Dravet syndrome. So again, in people with Dravet syndrome, if they have autonomic dysfunction, then that might tell us something about their risk of SUDEP. So I think my research will help to address a really important comorbidity, and I think hopefully this research will help us to screen for this in people with Dravet syndrome so that we can then start to treat the symptoms and problems that autonomic dysfunction might bring for that person with Dravet syndrome. Ultimately improve quality of life and reduce morbidity and mortality, hopefully.
And finally, our second co-funded fellow is Dr. Jenna Carpenter, who will develop a cutting-edge gene editing technique to work in Dravet syndrome.
Dravet syndrome is primarily a clinical diagnosis. Often the first symptoms are seizures, prolonged seizures in the first year of life. Then as people progress, or babies progress into toddlers, seizures are still present and quite hard to control. And then there's intellectual disability, there are problems with gait, there are problems with feeding, behavioural issues is a real problem, and that can go through life. It is not a childhood epilepsy, it is a lifelong condition.
The particular challenge with Dravet syndrome is that there are over 1,000 mutations that can cause the disease, so it is difficult to correct each individual mutation. So my project aims to develop the next generation gene therapy for Dravet syndrome. And what is unique about the project is that it offers a permanent treatment for Dravet syndrome that is able to dynamically adapt to the patient's brain as it develops over their lifetime. I'm really excited about this project because it uses cutting-edge genetic technologies, and these technologies offer the opportunity to actually cure disease by going directly into the patient's cells and changing the DNA code, so we can get directly into the root cause of Dravet syndrome and correct it. Thank you very much to the supporters of Dravet Syndrome UK and Epilepsy Research Institute UK, because without your support this research would not be possible.
This is a really exciting opportunity for us to actually be at the cutting edge of trying to understand how genetics work within Dravet syndrome, and it's something that hasn't been done before, so we're really excited to see and hope that some of the results will help to improve the management and care of people living with this awful condition.
And I just want to pass on my congratulations as chair of the SAC to all of the awardees for this year.
So thank you so much, Annie and Mike, for introducing each of the projects. Wow, a real broad range of projects there and really exciting research that's going to be happening over the next few years. I suppose for anyone watching who maybe doesn't know about our grant round and how it works, I wonder if I could come to you, Annie. So, you know, what happens in the grant round process?
Yeah, sure. So it's a really long process. It takes kind of most of the year for us. And I know that, you know, when you're applying for a grant, that might feel really frustrating to wait such a long time to get a decision. But a lot of work is going on behind the scenes, and it also involves quite a huge amount of people. So we rely heavily on both scientific experts in the field and the kind of lived experience of people affected by epilepsy as well. So firstly, all applicants have the chance to discuss their ideas with people affected by epilepsy before they submit their final applications. After submission, we then reach out to external researchers who have expertise kind of relevant to that project to provide a review and scores. And we aim to have at least kind of 3 external experts providing those reviews. Applicants then get a chance to provide a rebuttal to those reviews, and then our scientific advisory committee come in, and Mike will tell you a little bit more about them shortly, but they come in and take everything that's happened so far on board in order to shortlist and then make the final funding recommendations. And what's really exciting about the projects that the SAC recommended for funding this year was just the range of topics that were covered by the applications. So we have, you know, kind of lab-based projects looking at the underlying causes of epilepsy and the treatments that might be possible in the future, as well as some projects that are kind of looking to improve the management of epilepsy in the near future, such as by, you know, allowing people to choose the best medications for them, improving surgery, managing comorbidities, and also improving diagnosis.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Annie. Yeah, a really exciting array of projects this year. And of course, Annie, you mentioned our scientific advisory committee, and Mike, you have been chair of the scientific advisory committee for 4 years now. So for anyone who maybe isn't aware, what is the scientific advisory committee, or the SAC?
So the SAC is a collection of researchers. They can be either lab-based researchers or clinicians who work with patients, or they can be a mixture of both. But the main remit of the SAC is to decide on who gets funded by the Epilepsy Research Institute. So we, as Annie just very nicely laid out, we have a long and rigorous process in trying to get to the bottom of who's doing the best research and who the best researchers are. At all times, we try and keep the highest quality rigor when we're assessing these applications, because really, in the end, we want the people who donate the money to the Institute to see the best outcomes possible. So in a nutshell, what the SAC does, we decide who the best researchers are and what the best research is, and then we advise the Board of Trustees on who to fund.
Thanks so much, Mike. And you mentioned lab-based scientists and clinicians. We've also, I suppose, in recent years had data scientists and mathematicians on the SAC to reflect those areas of emerging areas of research as well, haven't we?
Absolutely, and I think that's only going to grow in the next decade. I mean, because obviously with AI and machine learning, there's going to be a lot more interest in mining patient data to try and get key findings out of these huge data sets that might be able to inform future studies. So yeah, absolutely. Data science is going to be a huge part of what the Institute does in the oncoming years.
And our scientific advisory committee do this as volunteers for the organisation. So we're incredibly grateful for the time and expertise that you give to the organisation as well. And it is, as Annie said, it's a really long and intense process. So the rigor of the process is thanks to you. And then Annie, of course, you alluded to our application clinics, which are another really integral part of the grant round. So do you want to say a little bit about what the application clinics are and how they involve members of our SHAPE network?
Yeah, sure. So every researcher that is planning to submit a full application to the Institute has the opportunity to meet with members of our SHAPE network. So we get a small group of SHAPE network members together and we have a Zoom call with the researcher. And the researcher starts by presenting their project and their project ideas. And then we really just open up into a discussion about the proposed study. So the SHAPE network members usually have some questions for the researcher about maybe things that they weren't sure about from their presentation or any areas of concern that they have about the project. And then the researcher also can ask the SHAPE network members some questions about how they've designed the study or if they're addressing kind of a relevant concern of the epilepsy community. And they're really fantastic to be involved in. And yeah, we're so grateful to our SHAPE network members who get involved and give up their time to help shape these projects. And I think we had some really lovely feedback from the researchers that took part this year, especially some of our lab-based researchers who don't see people affected by epilepsy in clinics or anything like that. So don't necessarily have that opportunity to discuss their projects and their work with people affected, and just they kind of said that the motivation that it provides and the kind of reassurance that they're working in an area that's important to people was just so helpful.
Thank you, Annie. And Catherine, you took part in our application clinics for this year, so we're incredibly grateful for your contribution. How did you find the application process and or the application clinic process? Yeah, if you could talk a bit about your experience of the application clinics, please. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So I think I participated in at least 3 of these clinics, and actually all 3 of them are quite different. So that sort of kept it interesting. But prior to the actual clinic, so Annie sent us an email with the proposal that we needed to read and some very helpful instructions on how to get onto the Zoom call and all that sort of stuff. So we had really clear instructions on what we needed to do before the clinic. And so I spent probably about an hour or 2 reading each time I had a clinic, about an hour or 2 reading the proposal and just trying to get an understanding of what the researchers were trying to achieve and what they were trying to do. So you don't get the full proposal, you get more of a summary of it. And the summary is supposed to be written for people who are not experts in the epilepsy research. So when you read it, you don't have to be a scientific expert. You just need to bring your lived experience of epilepsy to try and understand the proposal. And if the stuff that you're reading actually you don't understand, then that's a really good question to ask in the clinic itself. What is the research about and how could you make it more accessible for people who don't have a scientific background? So not being a scientific expert is good. You can just use that as one of your questions, actually. So actually it quite helps. But when you do the clinics, it's really good to meet the researchers and to hear about their research and to get a sense of their passion for what they're trying to achieve. And that's very infectious. So it's actually really lovely to be involved in that and to feel like you're being part of something new and exciting, and to hear what they've got to say. And I think also, because you're on a SHAPE network with another person who's got lived experience with epilepsy, it's also really good to hear their experiences, because not everybody's experiences of epilepsy are the same. And so it's good to kind of to hear from them and to learn from them and to understand what's important for them as well. So you get to learn quite a bit, as well as also to provide some sort of challenging questions for the researchers. And I think I felt like I was really being listened to, and I was really being valued as part of the process. And so that's great. You know, I wasn't there just, you know, to make up the numbers. I was there to have a really active role in supporting the researchers and helping them put together the best application that they can do. So on the whole, it's a great experience. It's not too onerous as an activity, but you do feel like you're making a difference.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That's such a brilliant summary of the process. And of course, we're incredibly grateful for all the time you've volunteered into taking part in the clinic and the reading up beforehand. And just on that note of researchers, kind of sometimes the lay summary that you're provided with, the scientific jargon can creep in. I wonder if you've got any advice for any researchers on making their research accessible, or any tips as to what they should do to make it understandable and accessible to a non-scientific audience.
So I think it is hard not to bring in scientific jargon, and often you're restricted on the number of words that you can put in these summaries. So you want to put as much information in as possible. But I think my advice is to maybe think about, how would you explain this to a person sitting on the bus next to you? Or how would you describe this research to, if you're at a barbecue in the summer, how would you talk to the person next to you and explain what your research is about? And so it's really about thinking about people just in the community. How would they understand it? You know, do you really need to use specific scientific jargon, or is there another way that you can describe it? But it's important to get across the passion and the impact of the research and what difference you think that's going to make to people who are living with epilepsy, because ultimately that's the goal. So just think about, how would you describe it to your next door neighbor, or person on the bus, or somebody at a barbecue who isn't in the lab next door to you, and think about what is the most important message that you want to get across to people who are living with epilepsy.
Brilliant, thank you. Any future potential grant holders watching, I hope you've scribbled all that down, because that's so helpful for making that research accessible and letting that passion come through. So thank you so much, Catherine. And on the topic of top tips, Mike, I wonder if you, as SAC chair, and you know, this is your, I think, 4th grant round as chair, but you've been through many more with us as an SAC member. But I wonder kind of what top tips you have for researchers considering applying for a grant.
Yes, I mean, I guess the key one, more than anything else, is simplicity and clarity in your application. I think a lot of, especially early career researchers who we fund through our fellowship schemes, really feel they've got to tell everything and show how smart they are, and give you really fine detail. And what's sometimes lost is the people who make the ultimate decision of whether you get funded or not funded isn't really the experts who we send the grants out to. It's the panel members, it's the SEC members. And if the SEC members can't really get the point of, why is this important? Why should this be funded over all the other ones we've got in our pile? I think that can be an issue. So if anything, I would say write with clarity, write with simplicity, and make sure that the people around that table, the SEC members, all of them actually understand why you're trying to do the work.
Thanks, Mike. Again, I'm sure there's lots of scribbling at home happening by researchers watching the webinar. So thank you so much. And Annie, so Catherine's spoken a bit about the application clinics, and so have you, but I wonder if you could say a bit about the other ways that members of the SHAPE network can get involved in research.
Yeah, so there's so many different ways that people affected by epilepsy can shape research. So really all across every stage of research. Sometimes we call it like the research cycle. So right from the very beginning, thinking about kind of prioritizing topics for research and research questions. It's so important that people affected by epilepsy kind of have a say in that. Throughout the research cycle, so we're thinking about designing studies in ways that are going to be accessible to people if they're clinical studies, or are going to be kind of working long term to address priorities if they're more lab-based studies. People affected by epilepsy might sit on kind of advisory boards or groups to work with a researcher throughout a study and help kind of address any problems that are coming up throughout a study. And then kind of coming towards the end of the research cycle, thinking about how research findings are communicated and making sure that they reach a kind of more lay audience, and thinking about routes to implementation and also where that research goes next. So what are the still kind of missing pieces of information that we need to get. And what I really like about the SHAPE network, and I'd hope, yeah, Catherine would agree, that it's really flexible. So we share opportunities for people to get involved in research, but it's really up to people to decide, you know, what most interests them and what works kind of around their other schedules and activities they've got going on in their lives.
And Catherine, would you agree with that? Do you kind of regularly see opportunities that you might be interested in, or maybe some that you think maybe another time, or this one's not for me?
Definitely. And so I think being involved, you can be as involved as you want to, or drop in and out as you want as well. So I think it is very flexible in that sense. And so I think actually just before I got on this call, I got another email of some other activities that are coming through. So you can be involved in them if you want, or if it's not the right time, then that's also okay. And then I think doing these clinics as well, it's not days and days of work. It's, you know, a couple of hours here and there. So it is a good way to be very effective and having quite a big impact.
And if anyone watching is affected by epilepsy and interested in either joining the SHAPE network or somehow getting involved in research, I wonder, Catherine, what you would say to them.
Well, I think so you or we are the experts in living with epilepsy, and so this is incredibly valuable for researchers to hear our experiences and to help shape their research, shape how they design it, how they do it, and also the impact. Because ultimately, if they get funded and they're successful, then it will impact on people like us. So it's really important to be involved. And I think also it's important, though, that my experiences of epilepsy are not the same as somebody else's experiences with epilepsy. So it's important as a community that we have lots of different voices that are helping to shape the research, because it just makes it better. It can only make it better if more people with experience are able to kind of be involved and to share their experiences and to share what they like and what impact that will have on them. It'll just only make the research better. So yeah, I think we should all get involved, really.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Yes, that's good. I think that's a definite. The research proposals that we see are 100% stronger, having had that input from people affected by epilepsy. And Mike, I wonder how the applications that we received this year, how they compared to previous years, really.
Thanks, Caoimhe. Actually, the applications that we had this year were exceptional, and certainly, you obviously saw the videos of all the awardees. They're all exceptional scientists, and even the people that we didn't manage to shortlist, because obviously we only have a certain amount of money, there were some really excellent applications there too. So I think it just highlights the base of epilepsy research that's growing within the UK, and hopefully that will continue to grow through the work of the Institute and other factors as well. But yeah, the applications this year, certainly in the sort of 4 years as my as me as chair in the 7 years I've been on the SAC, were excellent. I'd say they were certainly the best we've seen in all my time in the SAC.
Wow, brilliant. Well, I suppose that's reflected in the £2 million investment in the research as well. So thank you again. So we're coming around to the last question. This time has absolutely flown by. And I'm going to come back to you, Mike, first of all. So our final question is, what are your hopes for future research into epilepsy?
I guess I'll come up from two angles. The first one is from the research angle, and that is that funding continues to grow and the research base continues to grow. And of course, that has a knock-on consequence then for potential new treatments. And I guess the number that always sticks in my head ever since I've gotten into researching epilepsy is the number of drug-resistant epilepsies that we still don't seem to be able to shift that dial on, that 30% of people that don't have any obvious treatment. And I think there's real hope coming down the line, and certainly in terms of gene therapies for genetic epilepsies, but also the wider realm of epilepsies too, and also repurposing of drugs that have been used in other disorders that could potentially be used in epilepsy too. So I'm hopeful that by the end of the decade, that maybe we'll be shifting that number a little bit. That would be my main hope.
Thank you, Mike. And Annie, the same question to you. What are your hopes for future research into epilepsy?
Yeah, well, I would agree with Mike, of course, that that number is a really sad and shocking number and needs to come down. And just building on that, I think based on the discussion we've had today, we know how important it is for researchers and people affected by epilepsy to be working in partnership. So my hope is that continues to grow and we continue to see those relationships.
Thanks so much, Annie. And Catherine, what are your hopes for future research into epilepsy?
And so I've got, I guess, some specific ones, but for me, in the sense that it is about more personalized treatment. It felt to us, because we've been on this track for about 8 years now, that we seem to use the anti-epileptic medication of choice for the consultant that we were talking to and not necessarily truly understanding our son's condition. So I think having more personalized treatment and diagnosis would be excellent and benefit everybody. And I think because next week we're starting the surgical tract, it's kind of having that as it says surgical tract sounds like it could be a fast thing, but it's not. It's years and years of understanding and different tests and things like that. So I guess having a better, faster, more specific, easier way of diagnosing whether or not surgical treatments is an option is good and would be something to focus on. And sorry, I've got lots.
It's good.
And another one I think for us is how epilepsy and neurodiversity and learning and cognition, how that is all interplays together is something I think that is very personalized to us, I guess, because we have a young son who's going through the schooling system and how we can understand that and support that. But I think ultimately, for me, the future of research would be to just wake up each morning and think, I don't have to worry if he's going to have a seizure today. I think if we could do that, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, and that's such a poignant note to end today's webinar on. I think, yeah, you know, for as both Mike and Annie highlighted as well, that 30% of people who seizures do not respond to treatment and who wake up with that worry. And not, as you've pointed out, it's not just the people with epilepsy that are worrying, it's their families and friends and wider circles as well. So thank you so much, Catherine, for speaking with us today and for sharing your family's experiences. And we wish you all the very best for this new kind of surgical journey and next week. And hope everything goes well and hope to hear about it going well very soon as well. So thank you so much to our panelists today. Thank you to Catherine from our SHAPE network. Thank you to Mike as chair of our SAC. And thank you to Annie as our head of research and involvement. We've just got some opportunities that I wanted to share with people watching very briefly. So the Epilepsy Research Institute's capacity building theme leads have put together a survey to establish the current capacity in epilepsy research. And we really need the input of researchers working in epilepsy, researchers who have previously worked in epilepsy, and researchers who don't work in epilepsy. And we want to understand why you don't work in epilepsy, what's preventing you from. But for the researchers working in epilepsy, we want to know how we can make the epilepsy research ecosystem better. So the survey QR code is on screen. It's available until the 11th of June, 2024. We'd really, really appreciate your views, and the information that you give us will help shape the work of the Epilepsy Research Institute. For researchers watching, we also have the Hub. So the Hub is the online portal for researchers working in epilepsy and associated conditions. And you need an academic institute or hospital-affiliated email to join the Hub. But it's where all the discussions relating to our themes takes place, and where we regularly share job opportunities and research funding opportunities. And you can also apply to work with our SHAPE network on the Hub as well. And then finally, if you're watching and you're affected by epilepsy, then I think Catherine made such a compelling case for joining our SHAPE network. We regularly circulate opportunities for you to learn about the science of epilepsy, to participate in research studies, and of course to shape research priorities and how research studies are carried out. And so the web address is on screen there if you'd like to join the SHAPE network by visiting the link on screen. So again, that's all from us today, and we look forward to welcoming you to another Institute Insights webinar in the near future. So thank you so much for joining us.